Yeah, setting up port forwarding, a DNS, and encryption for Home Assistant. It's super easy and a good idea, and we're doing it today. Let's get to it. So you might be wondering, what did you just say? What is that stuff, and why do I care? Well, first, these services solve two big issues. One, accessing Home Assistant when you're not at home, so from an external network. And two, making sure when you access Home Assistant externally that nobody can snoop on your traffic, so that it's safe. Without getting too gritty, your Home Assistant instance by default is probably only accessible on your internal network, so you can probably only access it on devices that are running on the same router or switch. The IP address for the thing running Home Assistant is probably something like 192.168.0.100 or something like that. That's great, but if you type that IP address into your browser from, say, work, nothing happens. So what gives? The issue is that IP address is only accessible for devices on that internal network. Your router/modem, or however you have your network set up, does have a public IP address, which you can access from outside of your house. If you go into your router or modem configuration page, you'll probably see a tab labeled something like status or about, and there it should list what your public IP address is. If you type that public IP address into your browser, probably not a lot will happen. My guess is it'll just time out. And that's because nothing is listening. However, if you set up port forwarding, you can tell your router to take that external connection and to forward it to an internal network device. A port, by the way, is just a number that's appended onto the end of an IP address, which signifies a service that you're trying to reach at that device. So what is port forwarding then? Port forwarding is a service performed by your router, which will take a connection that's targeted towards your public IP address at a certain port, and then linking that to an internal IP address at a certain port. It sounds really complicated, but it's actually really straightforward. Let me show you how to set it up. First, you'll want to go to your router's configuration screen in your web browser. Then I'll go ahead and log in. For my Cisco router, port forwarding is located under the Applications and Gaming tab. Your router might be slightly different, so you might need to click around for a little bit. I'm going to create a new rule that forwards the external port 8123 to the internal port 8123 at the IP address of a Raspberry Pi that's running my dev copy of Home Assistant. I'll go ahead and check the box to enable it. Just for clarification, the external port can be any number you'd like. In this case, I just chose 8123 so that it matches the internal port as well. Now, I'll go ahead and hit save. The next thing I want to find is my public IP address. On my Cisco router, I can find that under the Status tab. In my case, my public IP address is this number here that you can't see. It's worth noting that you should treat this IP address with a little confidentiality. It is linked directly to you, and it's basically the equivalent of a phone number. Next, I want to check if that port forwarding worked. So I'll create a new tab, and I'll paste that public IP address, and then I'll say at port 8123. And then I'll click Enter. And look, bam! Now we're connected to Home Assistant. And it's worth noting that this is from an external connection, so I could pull this up just as easily on my phone through my cellular connection. But wait, there's a problem. Memorizing all those numbers can be kind of a drag. So you can use what's called a DNS server. A DNS server basically links a text string it receives, commonly known as an URL, to a public IP address. And that's basically how every website works. Getting started with DuckDNS is also really easy. To get started, I'm going to first go to duckdns.org. Then I'll create a new account. Once logged in, I want to create a new domain. In the subdomain box, name anything that you'd like. In my case, I'm going to call this dev, and then I'll click Add Domain. Now, it should be listed. The next thing you'll need to do is to add your public IP address into the current IP box. Again, it is pretty confidential, so I won't show you mine. Next, I'll click the Install button in the top bar. Then, under Operating Systems, I'll navigate to Pi. And then under Choose Domain, I'll select the domain that I want to install. The terminal instructions here walk you through the commands you need to run on your Raspberry Pi to get things set up. It's worth noting that one of the advantages of DuckDNS is that it has a script that runs on your Pi that automatically updates your public IP address to DuckDNS. This is useful if your internet service provider gives you a dynamic IP address, and your public IP address is changing all the time. For a lot of people, this probably isn't necessary, but it's definitely not a bad thing to install, so we'll go ahead and do that as well. Next, we'll open PuTTY and log into our Raspberry Pi. Now, we'll go ahead and run through these commands one at a time. First, I'll make a directory for DuckDNS. Then we'll navigate inside of that directory. Next, I'll use the command vi and make a duck shell script. This part can be a little tricky, so pay attention. First, copy the echo URL command that's in the DuckDNS installation options, and then navigate back to PuTTY. Now, press I, and then right-click, and then press escape, WQ, ! and enter. It's a little crazy, but that's how you insert text and then save using the vi command. Next, we'll make the shell script executable by using the chmod command. Then we'll update the cron process so that the script runs automatically. I like to use the nanotext editor, so I'll select 2 and then press enter. Then I'll scroll to the bottom of my cron tasks, and then I'll paste the cron tab text in the DuckDNS options into the cron tab configuration file. I'll press Ctrl X and then Y and then enter. Awesome. Next, I'll test to make sure the script is working. We can check the DuckDNS log by using the command cat duckdns.log and then pressing enter. If it worked, you should see OK in the bottom left-hand side of your terminal. And it does. To wrap things up here, we'll go ahead and start the cron service. And we'll navigate back to the root directory on the Pi by typing cd and then enter. And bam, all done. Ta-da! Now, you should be able to access your Home Assistant instance by going to http:// whatever name you chose, .duckdns.org:8123. But wait, there's one more thing. I want to set up encryption, so when I access Home Assistant from outside of my home network, I know that nobody's monitoring my traffic and snooping on what I'm doing. This encryption will ensure that the information that's sent from my Home Assistant server to whatever client device I'm using is secure, and so that other people on the network can't monitor or intercept it. To do this, I'll use a service called letsencrypt. Letsencrypt is a certificate authority and provides free SSL certificates. Long story short, the key basically allows connected devices to ensure that they're connected to the right server, and also only devices that have the key can interpret the transmitted messages. And also, only devices that have the key can decrypt transmitted messages. Setting up letsencrypt is super easy too. First, we'll need to go back to our router configuration options and go back to the port forwarding configuration options. We'll need to temporarily forward a couple of ports to the Raspberry Pi that's going to run the letsencrypt script. This is so that the script can validate the certificate. You'll need to forward port 80 and port 443. Once done, go ahead and hit Save Changes. Next, you can use the commands I listed on my website and linked below in the video descriptions. The first one is git clone. Once the letsencrypt files are downloaded, you can navigate into the directory by saying cd letsencrypt. Now, here's the important part. We'll want to run the following command. You'll need to change the information in this command to contain your email address and your DuckDNS domain name. Once added, go ahead and press enter. The script can take a while, so be patient. At some point, the script should pop up with something like this. It asks, how would you like to authenticate? For this, arrow down and select option number 2, and then press enter. Go ahead and agree to the terms. This prompt is asking how you would like to authenticate the certificates that you just downloaded. This is why we had to open the ports on our router earlier. If the script fails, it's probably because something went wrong when you were forwarding your ports. Once the script is finished, go ahead and run the chmod command so that Home Assistant can access the downloaded keys. Once the script is done, you'll want to go back to your port forwarding configuration screen. You can go ahead and turn off port forwarding at port 80. You don't need that anymore. What you do need to do is to forward the external port 443 to your internal port 8123 at the IP address for the device running Home Assistant. Now, you're really close to being done, but there's one more thing we need to do. We need to edit our Home Assistant configuration. To do this, open the configuration and scroll down to the bottom. Then, type or paste the configuration shown here. Create an entry for HTTP. Then, create a line for API password. This will create a password for your Home Assistant instance, and it's a great way to secure your Home Assistant instance. Then, I'll also create a line for SSL certificate and SSL key. You'll want to link to the folder that contains your Let's Encrypt certificates that you downloaded earlier. It should be something very similar to this, but instead of it saying bruh HADEV, it'll probably say the domain name you chose earlier. Once you make the changes, go ahead and save, and then go back to PuTTY and type sudo reboot. And that's it. You should be good to go. Now, you should be able to access your Home Assistant instance by going to https:// whatever domain name you chose, .duckdns.org. No port required. It's important to note that when you're running with encryption, that you switch to HTTPS and you don't use a port number anymore. With any luck, when you press enter, it should connect to Home Assistant. Nice. Go ahead and type in your password, and you're connected. Nice. One thing I should point out is that the Let's Encrypt certificates are only valid for 90 days. At that point, you'll have to redo the Let's Encrypt process and get new keys. It's kind of a pain, but it's really not that big of a deal once you do it a couple times. So I hope this video helps you guys get started with port forwarding and DNS and encryption. I know it can be a little intimidating at first, but it's actually really straightforward. And to me, it's critical for being comfortable accessing my home automation system when I'm not home. And after all, that's one of the best things about having an automated home. You can access it from anywhere. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or thoughts, or if there's things that I can do to help. I do read them all, and I do my best to respond to as many as I can. If you like this video, subscribe. And if you want to see more stuff, please share the channel as much as you can. I've been blown away how much this channel is continuing to grow, and it's really starting to open up some doors for me to explore some technologies that otherwise I probably wouldn't have gotten, which is good for everyone. So yeah, I think that's it. As always, happy automating. Cheers.